The afternoon sun was high over Oak Ridge Lane, casting a golden glow over the quiet, upscale neighborhood. Lawns were perfectly trimmed, brick homes lined the street, and the only sound was the distant hum of lawnmowers, until a deep, menacing growl broke the peace. Standing in the middle of the road was a massive black mastiff, muscles tense, lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth. His name was Reaper, and everyone in the area knew to stay away when he was outside. No one had ever dared to approach him until today. Next to Reaper stood Dominic Vescari, a man as intimidating as the dog he held on a thick chain leash. Dressed in a dark, fitted suit with a crisp white shirt slightly unbuttoned at the top, his broad frame and sharp jawline made him look more like a bodyguard than a neighbor. He rarely spoke to anyone and never smiled. Rumors surrounded him, whispers of a criminal past, maybe even mafia ties. And as Reaper snarled, baring his fangs, Dominic held the leash tight, expecting the worst. But across from them, calmly standing on the pavement in a pink dress and sparkly shoes, was a little girl, Emily Harper, no more than 6 years old, with a backpack slung over her shoulders and the sun catching the blonde in her ponytail. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she looked directly into Reaper's eyes. Curious, calm, innocent. Dominic's voice was low, commanding. "Stay back," he said. "He's not safe." But Reaper didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He stared at the girl like he didn't know what to do. For a moment, the tension in his body faded. The growl softened into a low whine. Dominic looked down, confused. Reaper had never reacted this way. Not to anyone. Then Emily spoke. "Is he angry because I looked at him?" Her voice was soft, but steady. Dominic blinked. He wasn't used to children talking to him, especially not like this. "He's just protective," he said. "What's his name?" she asked. "Reaper." Emily giggled. "That's a funny name." Just then, a woman's voice shouted from around the corner, panic in her tone. "Emily, come here now." Moments later, Claire Harper appeared, breathless, rushing toward her daughter. She scooped the child into her arms, eyes darting to Dominic and his still silent dog. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "She just wandered." Dominic raised a hand. "It's fine." But as Claire turned away with Emily, Reaper sat quietly beside Dominic, still watching the little girl leave, with a look Dominic had never seen before. Dominic stood in the street a moment longer, watching Claire and Emily disappear down the sidewalk. Reaper, unusually still at his side, didn't move until they turned the corner. The leash hung slack in Dominic's hand now. There was no tension left in the dog. He glanced down and noticed something strange. Reaper's ears were pulled back, not in aggression, but in what looked eerily like concern. That was new. That was wrong. Reaper didn't feel things. He attacked, he obeyed, but he didn't feel. Back inside his house, Dominic poured himself a glass of bourbon, the ice clinking loud in the silence. His home was spotless, sterile almost. Everything in its place, cold and efficient. He sat by the window, drink in hand, staring at the street where it had happened. The image of that little girl wouldn't leave his mind. Emily had looked at Reaper like she knew him, like she understood something no one else did. And Reaper, he responded like he knew her too. That kind of connection didn't happen, not between strangers. Not like that. He had trained Reaper himself, painstakingly, methodically. The dog had been raised for one purpose: protection and intimidation. Reaper had been used in jobs Dominic never liked to think about anymore. The people they had faced, the places they'd been, the blood. Reaper was a mirror of the life Dominic had built, and now the life he was trying to leave behind. But today something cracked, and he didn't know if it was in the dog or in him. Across the street, Claire was pacing in her driveway, phone pressed to her ear. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Was she calling the police? Reporting him? Maybe she should. He had no business bringing a dog like Reaper into a neighborhood like this. But something told him it wasn't that. Claire didn't look angry. She looked unsettled, like she was trying to process something she didn't quite understand either. Later that night, Dominic took Reaper out again. The street was empty, bathed in the orange glow of street lamps. Reaper walked without pulling, head low, calm. Dominic noticed something odd. Reaper kept glancing toward the Harper's house. Not barking, not growling, just watching, as if waiting. Dominic tugged gently on the leash. "What are you looking for, boy?" he asked under his breath. The dog didn't respond, of course. But in that moment, Dominic felt something shift in the pit of his stomach. A sense that this wasn't over, that whatever had started on that street wasn't a coincidence. And as he turned back toward his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emily Harper had brought more than innocence into his life. She had brought something buried, something dangerous. That night, sleep didn't come easily for Dominic. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint ticking of the old wall clock echoing through the stillness. He hadn't had a restless night in years. His body was trained to shut down when needed, disciplined from a life that didn't allow hesitation. But now, with Reaper curled up at the foot of the bed, unusually quiet, his mind kept circling back to that little girl's face and the strange stillness in his dog's eyes. By morning, Dominic was already out front, coffee in hand, scanning the neighborhood like he always did. It was a habit he'd never broken. Know who's around, who's new, who's watching. But this time, he wasn't looking for enemies. He was looking for Emily. And sure enough, not long after the school bell rang in the distance, Claire stepped out of her house, walking Emily down the driveway toward their car. Dominic noticed her glance his way. Their eyes met briefly. Not fear, not anger, just curiosity, maybe even caution. He thought about walking over, saying something, but what would he even say? "Sorry my killer dog got soft when he met your daughter?" No, that wasn't him. Instead, he gave a slight nod. Claire didn't nod back. But she didn't look away either. That said enough. Later that day, as Dominic sorted through old files in his garage, papers he should have burned years ago, he heard a soft knock. Not on the front door, but the side gate. Reaper perked up instantly but didn't bark. That alone made Dominic's chest tighten. He opened the gate slowly and found Emily standing there, holding a small drawing in her hands. "I made this," she said shyly, handing it up to him. He hesitated, then took it. It was a crayon sketch of a big black dog next to a little girl. Both were smiling. Dominic knelt to her level. "You shouldn't be back here alone." "I'm not," she said. "Mom's watching from the car." He glanced over and saw Claire in the driver's seat, eyes locked on them. She looked tense but wasn't moving. "Not yet. She says I can't stay long," Emily continued. "But I wanted to give this to Reaper." Dominic looked down at the paper again. "You remembered his name." Emily smiled. "He remembers mine." That simple sentence hit Dominic harder than he expected. Something about the way she said it felt heavier than a child's imagination. Felt true. And in that moment, for reasons he couldn't explain, Dominic felt something he hadn't felt in years. The first tug of a connection he didn't understand. One that might cost him everything. Claire didn't get out of the car. She just waited behind the wheel, engine idling, eyes locked on Dominic as he crouched beside her daughter. When Emily turned to return to the car, Claire gave a slight wave. Half gesture, half warning. Dominic nodded again, this time slower. As the car pulled away, Reaper stood beside him, still staring at the spot where the girl had been standing. His ears twitched slightly. Something was stirring inside the dog, and Dominic could feel it like static in the air. He brought the drawing inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, but it kept catching his eye. Reaper, drawn in thick black crayon, looked peaceful, happy even. Dominic ran a hand over his face. "What are you doing to me, kid?" he muttered. But that question wasn't really for Emily. It was for himself. Because ever since that strange moment on the street, memories had started to bleed in. Things he'd buried so deep, they were practically fossilized. That night, while going through an old footlocker tucked away in the attic, Dominic found a photograph. It was faded, folded at the edges. A woman with deep brown eyes and a little boy beside her, no older than 6. His mother, and him. The boy looked nothing like the man he'd become. There was a softness in his eyes that didn't survive the years ahead. He stared at it for a long time, until the sound of Reaper growling downstairs broke the silence. Dominic rushed down. The dog was standing at the back door, tail rigid, hackles raised. But he wasn't barking. He was focused, alert, like he recognized something. Dominic opened the door slowly, but the yard was empty. No sounds, no motion. Just the wind in the trees. Then came the smell, cigarette smoke. Stale. Faint. But Dominic knew it. It was a brand no one used anymore. Except one man. Frank Delgado. The name hit like a punch to the chest. Frank was part of the old life. The dangerous part. The part Dominic thought he'd buried when he disappeared from New York and bought this quiet house in Texas. If Frank was nearby, it wasn't a coincidence. And it wasn't friendly. He closed the door and locked it, turning to Reaper. The dog was still alert, tail down now but eyes sharp. "If he's here," Dominic said quietly, "it means something's coming." He looked back at the drawing on the counter. That girl had walked into his life out of nowhere. And now his past was following close behind her. The next morning, Dominic barely touched his coffee. His routine was broken. He didn't walk Reaper. He didn't patrol the neighborhood from his porch. Instead, he sat in the kitchen, staring at the drawing Emily had given him. It was so innocent, so out of place in a house like his. The crayon lines felt like an invasion. Not of danger, but of something far more disarming, warmth. Something he hadn't let in for a long time. And now, with Frank Delgado's scent in his backyard, the past was no longer in the past. Frank had been more than a partner in crime. He was once like family. But their last job ended in blood, betrayal, and a body that never got found. Dominic had made sure of that. So if Frank was alive and close, it meant he either wanted revenge or something worse. Dominic had built his life in this quiet corner of Texas to avoid exactly this moment. And now, a little girl had opened a crack that let it all come flooding back. Later that day, Claire knocked on his door. Not Emily, Claire. Alone. Her expression was serious, eyes sharp but hesitant. She held her hands tightly in front of her like she was trying to stop them from shaking. "I need to ask you something," she said. Dominic stepped aside without a word. Inside, the silence between them grew heavy. She finally spoke. "I saw a man near my backyard last night. He was smoking. Tall, gray jacket, maybe late 40s. Emily saw him too. She said he was watching the house." Dominic's chest tightened. He didn't react outwardly, but internally, alarms blared. "You should call the police," he said carefully. Claire shook her head. "I don't think this is about us. I think it's about you." For a long moment, neither said anything. Then Claire asked, "Who are you really, Dominic?" He met her eyes, and for the first time he didn't hide. "Someone who tried to leave things behind," he answered. "But sometimes, things don't stay buried." Reaper suddenly stood from his spot near the back window and let out a low growl. Dominic followed the dog's gaze, and his heart nearly stopped. There, taped to the glass, was a photo. It hadn't been there an hour ago. A printed picture, slightly smudged, of Dominic from years ago, standing next to Frank Delgado. He pulled it down, staring at it in silence. Claire stepped closer, looking over his shoulder. "Who is that?" she asked. Dominic didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed. "Someone who was supposed to be dead." Dominic sat at the edge of the kitchen table, the photo of him and Frank lying flat beneath his hand. His fingers traced the edges of the image like he could press time backward and fix everything that had gone wrong. But the truth was clearer than ever. Frank Delgado wasn't just alive. He was watching. The message wasn't subtle. It was personal. And it was only the beginning. Claire paced in silence, arms folded tightly. Reaper sat near the back door again, growling low, unmoving. "Why would someone do this?" she finally asked. Dominic didn't answer right away. He wasn't ready to tell her everything. Not yet. Not about the warehouse in Jersey. Not about the bodies. Not about the life he used to live before Reaper became more than just a weapon. Before Dominic became something other than just a ghost with blood on his hands. After a long pause, he finally spoke. Frank Delgado and we were in business together a long time ago. It ended badly. I left. He didn't. Claire looked at him, eyes narrowed. You mean you ran? He nodded. Yeah, I ran. To build something clean. He glanced toward the drawing still taped to his fridge. Until Emily came along, I thought I'd done it. Thought I was invisible. Claire looked like she wanted to ask more, but didn't. Instead, she simply said, he knows where I live now, and where she sleeps. That night, Dominic didn't sleep. Neither did Reaper. The two of them sat in the living room, lights off, weapons nearby. The silence between man and beast wasn't empty. It was purposeful. Reaper's ears twitched at every passing car. Dominic's eyes flicked toward every creak in the walls. At 2:47 a.m., the back porch light flickered, just once. Dominic stood slowly. Reaper was already at the door, head low, body tight. Dominic opened the door a crack. Lying at the top of the steps was a single cigarette butt, still warm. No note, no sound. But Dominic knew what it meant. Frank wasn't coming for him with guns. Not yet. This was a psychological hunt. A game of guilt and memory. And Emily, somehow, had stepped straight into the middle of it. At dawn, Dominic made a decision. He walked to Claire's house, knocked, and waited. When she opened the door, sleepy and cautious, he looked her straight in the eyes. You and Emily aren't safe anymore, he said. I need to tell you everything. And after that, I need to find him, before he finds her. Claire sat in silence, her fingers clenched around a chipped coffee mug as Dominic spoke. His voice was steady but low, like each word cost him something. He told her about New York, about the Vescari crew, about the years spent collecting debts, moving cash, silencing threats, and about Frank Delgado, his closest friend who had turned on him for power. Claire didn't interrupt. She just listened, absorbing the truth with the quiet resilience of someone who'd heard lies before and always sensed the truth hiding beneath them. He explained the warehouse job, the one that went bad. How Frank had orchestrated a double-cross to take Dominic out of the game for good. But Dominic survived, and in return, left Frank for dead after a brutal fight that left blood on concrete and fire in the rearview mirror. Dominic ran, changed his name, disappeared. But secrets don't stay buried forever. And now, Frank had come to collect what he believed he was owed. Reaper sat at Dominic's feet the whole time, unmoving, listening, as if he understood. Claire finally set the mug down and said, So why now? Why show up after all these years? Dominic shook his head. I don't know, but I think it's because of Emily. Claire blinked, stunned. She's a child. What could he possibly want with her? Dominic hesitated. I don't think it's about her. I think it's about me. But he's using her. Because he knows I care. That I'd protect her. That admission, I care, felt heavier than anything else he'd said. Claire stood and walked to the window, arms crossed tightly. So what now? She asked. You go after him? Dominic's eyes were cold. I don't wait for people like Frank to make the first move. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. He wasn't the same man he once was. He had left that world behind. Could he really step back into it and survive? That night, Dominic opened the old metal case hidden beneath the floorboards in his bedroom. Inside were the tools of his former life. A pistol, an unregistered phone, stacks of burner IDs, and something he hadn't looked at in years. A silver chain with a woman's wedding band on it. Madeline's. He held it in his hand, his throat tightening. Her death was the reason he'd disappeared. The reason he never let himself get close again. But now something had changed. Because of one little girl and her drawing, he couldn't stay silent anymore. Dominic slid the pistol into his waistband, locked the house, and looked down at Reaper. Let's finish what we started. The warehouse on the edge of town hadn't changed much. Rusted siding, cracked windows, and the same smell of oil and dust that always hung in the air. Dominic had scouted it hours before dawn, and now, as the sun broke over the horizon, he stood in its shadow again. Reaper at his side, silent and alert. This place was never just a warehouse. It was where Dominic had first met Frank Delgado, where they'd shared secrets, blood, and eventually betrayal. And now maybe it would be where it ended. Inside, the dust stirred under Reaper's paws. The dog was tense, ears forward, every muscle alert. Dominic moved slowly, checking corners, gun low. But there was no ambush, no trap, just silence. And then a sound. Footsteps. Familiar. Measured. A man stepped from the shadows wearing a gray jacket and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Never thought you'd come back here," Frank said, voice like gravel. His hair was streaked with gray now, but the cruelty in his expression was still sharp. "But then again, I knew that kid would get to you." Dominic didn't speak. Not yet. Frank stepped closer, casually lighting a cigarette. "She's got her mother's eyes. Did you ever wonder, Dominic? About Madeline?" The name hit him like a blow. His grip on the gun tightened. "What are you talking about?" Frank exhaled smoke slowly. "You thought I killed her. But she wasn't just your wife, was she? She was my sister." Dominic's heart slammed in his chest. "Liar." Frank shook his head. "You never knew her real name. She kept it from you. From everyone. But she told me everything before she died." Dominic felt the floor shift beneath him, as if the years of rage, guilt, and loss were crumbling all at once. Frank stepped closer. "Emily's not just a stranger's kid. She's family. She's Madeline's blood. That's why you felt it. That's why the dog felt it. She's connected to you more than you realize." Reaper let out a soft growl. Not out of threat, but recognition. Dominic looked at him, then back at Frank. "Why now?" he asked. "Because," Frank said, eyes narrowing, "you owe her the truth, and you owe me a reckoning." Dominic didn't lower his weapon. He couldn't, not yet. But something deeper than revenge was taking hold. Truth, legacy, blood, and the realization that the girl who had tamed the fiercest dog in Texas was, somehow, the last living thread to the only woman he'd ever loved. Dominic didn't move. The warehouse felt colder now, despite the rising sun outside. His gun stayed raised, but his resolve flickered. Not from fear, but from something deeper. The weight of truth. Frank's words echoed like bullets ricocheting through the past. "Emily's not just a stranger's kid. She's family." It made no sense. And yet it explained everything. Her eyes. Reaper's reaction. The pull Dominic couldn't shake. "You're lying," Dominic said, but his voice lacked certainty. Frank stepped forward, slower now. "Madeline never told you because she knew it would destroy everything you built. She wanted out, Dom. Out of your world. And out of mine." She ran. She hid. She had the baby and disappeared. Until someone found her. Frank's eyes darkened. "And you blamed me for what happened to her. But I wasn't the one who pulled that trigger." Dominic's breath caught. The rage he'd buried all these years, the grief that had poisoned his soul, began to shift. Could it be true? Had he spent a decade hunting the wrong ghost? Frank reached into his coat slowly and tossed a folded piece of paper onto the floor. "That's her hospital record. Birth certificate. Claire Harper isn't her real name. She changed it after Madeline died. To protect the girl." He didn't pick it up. He didn't have to. Deep down, something inside Dominic already knew. Emily was Madeline's daughter. His niece. Maybe more. The blood didn't matter. The bond already existed. He'd felt it the first time she looked Reaper in the eyes and calmed the beast with a single stare. That wasn't coincidence. That was legacy. Frank took a step closer, his voice colder now. "But this doesn't change what you did. You left me bleeding in that warehouse like garbage. You walked away with everything, and I had to rebuild from nothing." Dominic's eyes hardened. "You tried to kill me. You would have done worse if I hadn't stopped you." The tension snapped. In one sudden move, Frank reached for his belt, but Reaper lunged before he could draw. The dog hit him with the full weight of 10 years of silent loyalty. Dominic rushed forward, gun raised, shouting, "Reaper! Enough!" The dog stopped, teeth inches from Frank's neck. Blood dripped, but not fatal. Not yet. Dominic stood over Frank, breathing heavy. He looked at the man who had once been his brother, now reduced to a bitter shadow of himself. "This ends here," Dominic said, voice low. "No more threats. No more games. Emily never knows about this. About you. She deserves peace." Frank didn't respond. He just looked away, defeated, broken, and quiet. 2 days had passed since the confrontation at the warehouse, but for Dominic, it felt like years. He hadn't told Claire what had happened, not the full truth, just enough to let her breathe easier. That the man who had been watching them was gone, that they were safe now. The rest, he decided, would remain buried. Some stories weren't meant for daylight, and some ghosts didn't need names. Claire hadn't asked for details. Maybe she knew he was protecting more than just Emily. Maybe she saw the weight in his eyes and chose to let it rest. What mattered now was that Emily could go to school without being watched, that Claire could sleep through the night, and that Reaper, for the first time in his life, seemed at peace. No more growling at shadows. No more pacing the hall. He lay quietly by the window now, tail flicking gently when Emily passed by. One afternoon, Emily came to the porch holding a tattered storybook and a big smile. "Can Reaper listen to my reading homework?" she asked. Dominic chuckled, the sound unfamiliar even to him. "I think he'd like that." She sat cross-legged beside the dog, her little voice reading slowly, carefully. Reaper rested his head on her lap, letting out a deep, contented sigh. Dominic watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart heavy in a new way, not from guilt, from gratitude. That night, Dominic pulled out Madeline's ring again. He sat at the kitchen table under the hum of a low light, staring at the silver circle in his palm. So many years lost, so many words never spoken. But somehow, through Emily, a piece of Madeline had found its way back to him. And through that child's quiet courage, something in Dominic had started to heal. He walked out back with Reaper, the moon high overhead. The Texas wind was soft against his face. He opened the tin box where he kept the weapons and old IDs, and this time he emptied it, piece by piece. Gun, badges, burners, all of it. He tossed them into the fire pit and struck a match. Reaper sat nearby, calm, watching the flames rise. The past burned quickly, but the peace it left behind lingered. The next morning, as Emily ran up the sidewalk to greet Reaper with a hug, Claire stepped beside Dominic, coffee in hand. "She's different since she met you," she said softly. Dominic looked at the girl laughing in the yard and replied, "I think we both are." Claire smiled, and for the first time in a long time, so did he.